Hello everyone, I am the Meta Kirby, and welcome to my channel, The Commander Tavern. Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews and other deck techs. On this episode of The Brewery, I'll be discussing my take on a commander from Modern Horizons 2, Chatterfang Squirrel General. If you like this deck or any of the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel. The best way you can help support the channel is with my Patreon. For just $1, patrons get early access to scheduled videos on YouTube. You can also support my channel for free by simply liking, subscribing, and sharing, which also helps out a lot. You can join my Discord server for free if you want to join the Commander Tavern community. All pertinent links are down in the description. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Chatterfang is a 3/3 Squirrel Warrior with Forest Walk for 2 generic and 1 green. Since it has an activated ability that requires black mana to activate, it has a black-green color identity. That ability is amazing since you'll be creating a lot of squirrels with this deck, so being able to deal with even indestructible creatures or creatures that can regenerate is definitely a plus, especially since this deck also takes advantage of our creatures dying, which we'll see in a bit. Its replacement ability also synergizes with itself since it creates the same amount of 1/1 squirrel tokens as whatever other tokens you're creating. So if you were to create a treasure token, you create both a treasure token and a squirrel token instead, which is amazing. This gets out of hand really fast, so keep a calculator handy when playing with this deck, and plenty of tokens. Lots of tokens. Since Chatterfang's activated ability is for more interaction and response against creatures, the deck focuses mainly on its first ability since it helps fuel the second one anyways. In order to make the most of it, the deck has plenty of ways to create tokens. Chitter Spitter, Deep Forest Hermit, and Deranged Hermit are potentially some of the best ones since they also double as boons, giving our squirrels +1/+1. However, the Hermits don't stick around for long unless you pay Deranged Hermit's Echo cost. Unfortunately, this is a reserved list card, so unless you already have it or don't care about proxying it, it's not entirely necessary for the deck to function, although it is amazing here. Chitter Spitter will always have fuel since we're constantly creating tokens for the deck. It can also create a token itself, making it a 1-card value engine. Scoot Swarm, Tireless Tracker, and Tireless Provisioner create tokens via landfall. Scoot Swarm has the potential of creating a huge amount of tokens in and of itself, but combined with Chatterfang will literally swarm the board. The Tireless duo don't create creatures, but their tokens are incredibly useful anyways. They'll also help Chatterfang create squirrels when they do, so they synergize amazingly well here. Asika's Chariot, Emrakul's Evangel, and Squirrel Nest also make squirrels but need to be activated to do so. The Chariot makes 2/2 cats when it enters the battlefield, but the token copy it makes requires it to be attacking, so it's almost like being activated. Emrakul's Evangel is simply busted in this deck. If you were to sacrifice 10 squirrel tokens, you make 10 3/2 Eldrazi horror tokens as well as 10 squirrel tokens if Chatterfang was out, essentially giving you 10 3/2s with no drawback and all the benefit if you had effects that care about your creatures dying. Squirrel Nest might not seem that powerful here, but if you combine it with Earthcraft, you get the classic Infinite Squirrels combo. The way it works is by enchanting a basic land with Squirrel Nest. Then when it's time to create the squirrel token, you can then untap that token to activate Earthcraft, untapping that basic land, and being able to do it all over again. These cards work well on their own anyways, especially in this deck. The only downside to Earthcraft is being on the reserve list. So just as with Deranged Hermit, if you don't already have it or don't care about proxying it, you don't really need it for the deck if you can't afford it. Gingerbread Cabin, Colony Garden, Westfield Abbey, Field of the Dead are some lands that can create tokens fairly easily. The first two are one-time only deals since they create them when they enter the battlefield. The cabin has a requirement, so keep that in mind. Field of the Dead also creates a token via a landfall trigger. Since it requires having lands with different names, the deck is running its basic lands as only 2 of each normal ones and 2 of each snow-covered ones to increase the likelihood of it triggering off that land entering the battlefield and giving us that 2/2 zombie token. The Abbey has a steep activation cost to get a creature token, but if you're able to transform it into Ormendal Profane Prince, then you've got a 9/7 indestructible flyer with haste and lifelink, which is quite the beater, and healer too. Sacrificing those 5 creatures is a piece of cake for this deck, and it can actually trigger other effects, which again we'll see later. Garruk Cursed Huntsman, Tevesh Sat Doom of Fools, Vraska Relic Seeker, and Liliana Dreadhorde General are the 4 Planeswalkers of the deck, and one of the main reasons they were chosen was because they create creature tokens without losing loyalty to do so. But they also have their own merits. Garruk, Vraska, and Liliana can potentially serve as removal with their second ability. Garruk also makes an amazing emblem for this deck since it gives our creatures a permanent overrun effect. Vraska's ultimate isn't the main reason for running her, but if we pull it off, it's pretty much game over for an opponent. Liliana is probably the best of these 4 since her triggered ability will draw us into a ton of cards. This is just one of the many abilities in the deck that draws cards from creatures dying, which will happen quite often. Her ultimate is almost a board wipe, which is quite the red button if it comes down to it. Tevesh Sat isn't a slouch here either. He can draw us cards too, and his ultimate steals all commanders, which makes him very feared, forcing players into trying to attack him or waste their resources on him. And we just want him mostly for his first 2 abilities. Acorn Harvest, Chatter of the Squirrel, Chatterstorm, Sprout Swarm, and Verdict Command are seemingly one-time only ways of getting tokens since they're instants and sorceries. At least the first two can be reused once more since they have Flashback and Sprout Swarm has Buyback and Convoke. So with enough tokens you should be able to consistently and constantly make tokens with it, especially if you control Chatterfang when you do. Chatterstorm is amazing if we cast enough spells that turn. It's no Empty the Warrens, but even if we only get one token from it, it's still at a good cost. Verdict Command also doubles as a control piece since we can counter loyalty abilities or exile a card from a graveyard. Second Harvest, Parallel Evolution, and Saproling Symbiosis are some more instants and sorceries that create tokens, but these have the potential of creating a ridiculous amount of tokens, especially with Chatterfang out and or any token doublers as well. Saproling Symbiosis is a bit better since it doesn't care about tokens but creatures per se, so it has the potential of creating even more tokens than the first two do. Speaking of which, Doubling Season, Parallel Lives, and Primal Vigor double the amount of tokens we create. On their own, they work well at being a good Plan B Chatterfang, but when used in unison can really take over the game. These are pretty self-explanatory, so their inclusion is obvious. Just be careful when using Primal Vigor against other token decks or against +1/+1 counters matters decks. Pitiless Plunderer is the last token creator in the deck, but it's definitely not least. This card is ridiculous in this deck. Along with Chatterfang and a free sacrifice outlet, you can essentially generate infinite mana as well as infinite death triggers. In fact, combined with Altar of Dementia, it's practically game over. Let's see how this works. With Chatterfang, Pitiless Plunderer, and Altar of Dementia in play, any creature you sacrifice to the altar begins the infinity. The altar mills an opponent while the death trigger has the pirate create a treasure token. Since you have Chatterfang, you instead create a treasure token and a squirrel token. You then sacrifice the squirrel token to the altar to start all over again. So long as no opponents have an Eldrazi Titans or other ways to prevent loss by milling, you essentially win the game. If not, then you at least get infinite treasure tokens to pay for whatever you want. Granted, that combo is just one way to win, but the main route to victory is simply outgrowing your army much faster than the rest of the table and alpha strike everyone out of the match. However, it's still going to be quite the uphill battle, dealing 120 damage when Chatterfang makes lowly 1/1s. Well, that's what the boons are for. We already saw Traitor Spitter, Deep Forest Hermit, and Deranged Hermit, but those aren't the only ones. The deck's also running Eldrazi Monument, Coat of Arms, Sylvan Anthem, and Beastmaster Ascension. The Monument's downside is barely a tickle for the deck compared to giving our squirrels +1/+1, flying, and, more importantly, indestructible. Coat of Arms is obviously stupid good here with all of our squirrels scurrying about. Beastmaster Ascension can practically give the boon immediately given how many creature tokens we create at once. Just one combat step will be enough to get it up to at least 7 counters. Sylvan Anthem isn't a huge pump as the other 3, but it does scry us 1 each time a green creature enters the battlefield. So with every green creature we play or each squirrel token created will scry us 1. It's crazy how deep we can dig through our library with this. It's practically a consistent tutor in enchantment form. Crashing Drawbridge is perhaps the greatest boon effect of all, though, since it can tap to give all of our creatures haste. Assembling a game-ending army isn't enough if our opponents have the time to deal with it before we can swing in. But creating a ton of hasty squirrels that are pumped is something else entirely. You'd be surprised how often this inconspicuous 2-drop wins us the game. Another less inconspicuous artifact that can win us the game in one fell swoop is Strixhaven Stadium. Not only does this double as a mana rock, but if we don't swing in with enough creatures to get the win, if we manage to trigger the stadium 10 or more times, it won't matter. We'll still kill off that opponent. This is definitely not meant to store counter since it does paint a huge target on our back, but once it's at 0 again, it won't matter if we get hit, but it will definitely let opponents know they're on the brink of losing. Triumph of the Hordes takes it a step further by securing us the victory against all 3 opponents at once if we manage to deal 10 damage to each of them. If your pod doesn't care about you playing cards that are legal in the format, then this one's a no-brainer for a deck like this one that very easily goes wide. Now let's talk about what every deck needs: card advantage, interaction, and mana acceleration, 3 things that black and green have no issues with. Starting with card advantage, the deck can synergistically draw into a ton of cards thanks to Toski Bearer of Secrets and Oran Frostfang. So long as we have the advantage of numbers, we can potentially draw into plenty of cards each combat phase. As a bonus, Toski is also a squirrel, so it benefits from all of the tribal boons in the deck. The Frostfang also makes opponents think twice about blocking our weenies to infiltrate for whatever blocks them. Skullclamp, Yawgmoth, Thram Physician, and Smothering Abomination are even more synergistic ways of drawing cards, but aren't limited to combat. Skullclamp is better used when our squirrels are still 1/1s, but even if they aren't, as long as we can sacrifice them for free, we still draw 2 cards off of that equipped creature dying. The Eldrazi only triggers when a creature is sacrificed, but it's itself a sacrifice engine. Granted, it's tied to the upkeep step, but that's a free draw right there. Yawgmoth is the free instant speed sacrifice engine. We do have to pay 1 life, but at least he can also snipe creatures if we sacrifice enough of our tokens to him. On the other hand, Moldervine Reclamation, Dark Prophecy, and Species Specialist don't care about how the creatures died, just that they died. Moldavine Reclamation is such a great card to pair with Yawgmoth since it cancels out the life we lose while also getting us 2 cards from it. Same with Dark Prophecy since we lose 1 life from it too. So the Reclamation is a great card to have with either of these on the battlefield. Species Specialist is restricted to a certain creature type, but that won't be such an issue so long as we choose Squirrel as the creature type. Even then, these effects pale in comparison to Necropotence, the best black card draw effect in the format. It bypasses effects from cards like Hull Breacher, Smothering Tithe, etc., with the only downside being not drawing in our draw step and exiling anything we discard. However, we do get to fill our hand at the end of each turn for just life. Combine it with Reliquary Tower and we can draw as many cards as we're comfortable paying life for since we have no maximum hand size. On their own, these cards are great in this deck anyways. As for responses, you can't go wrong with my 2 favorite mono black enchantments, Dictate of Erebos and Grave Pact. With all the creatures we're losing in combat or sacrificing to effects, these enchantments pretty much ensure that we can swing in unopposed since we're more than likely winning any wars of attrition. We can also benefit from our opponent's creatures dying as well as with our other cards and effects. Beast Within, Assassin's Trophy, and Casualties of War are pretty self-explanatory. The first 2 get rid of pretty much anything at instant speed, while the latter can get rid of plenty of permanents in one fell swoop. Heroic Intervention, Rapid Vigor, and Golgari Charm help us against opponents' responses. The latter 2 are amazing against those effects without a can't be generated clause. You'd be surprised how often these effects save our board state from certain doom. Swarmyard does something similar but tied to a mana producing land that doesn't enter the battlefield tapped. This comes in pretty clutch at protecting Chatterfang. Dalaget Recovery is a great recovery spell for anything we might need and also doesn't take up a slot in the deck since its backside is a green mana producing land, so there's no reason not to run it. We can also generate plenty of mana while simultaneously getting more advantage via Ashnod's Altar and Phyrexian Altar. Sometimes we might not even need the mana, but since they're free sacrifice outlets we can trigger the effects that draws cards, have the table sacrifice a creature, etc. So there are obvious includes here. Growing Rats of Itlimoc is another great addition in order to generate a ton of mana when it transforms into Itlimoc Cradle of the Sun. Given how easily we'll have 4 more creatures at the beginning of our end step, we'll definitely transform it easily. If Gaia's Cradle is out of the question, worry not because Itlimoc will get online very quickly with this deck. Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth and Yavimaya Cradle of Growth don't accelerate our mana per se, but together they turn all of our lands into bayous, which is great. We will never be color screwed and they don't take up a slot on the deck. Yavimaya in particular is great because Chatterfang has Forest Walk. Farseek, Nature's Lore, and 3 Visits, my favorite ramp trifecta, do accelerate our mana in the best way possible because of how many people refuse to run mass land destruction effects or land destruction effects in general. Given the dual type lands in the decks, these are a no-brainer. Reshape the Earth is another insane way to get lands onto the battlefield and is very easy to cast in this deck. Not only are we thinning our library of 10 lands, but if we get fetches with them, we can thin it even further since we can choose whichever lands we want. Naturally, choose all the utility lands and fetch lands first. You can even get Dryad Arbor out with it as well as with other spells except Farseek or the fetch lands since it helps with Itlimoc or as a way to get a free creature for any aristocrat effect we have. It doesn't even take up a slot in the deck since it's technically a land too. Jewel Lotus, Soul Ring, Mana Crypt, Arcane Signet, Golgari Signet, and Talisman of Resilience are the rest of the ways we accelerate mana with the deck. Running rocks might seem more fragile than simply running more land wrap effects, but keep in mind that the deck is only running 8 basics between normal and snow covered to be able to trigger Field of the Dead as often as possible. Most wrap effects get basic land types which aren't as plentiful here. The rest of the deck is just the rest of the lands. The deck's running all 8 fetch lands, Bayou, Overgrown Tomb, Woodland Chasm, Undergrowth Stadium, Twilight Mire, Woodland Cemetery, Tainted Wood, Command Tower, and Ancient Tomb, as well as the 8 basic lands mentioned earlier. As with all of my deck techs, you don't need the more expensive fetch lands or Bayou if you're not playing online or proxying them. Same with Jewel Lotus and Mana Crypt. You can swap them out for budget substitutes and the deck will still run just fine. This brews just an idea of how to build around Chatterfang Squirrel General. What I like most about this commander is that you don't have to go full-blown Squirrel Tribal with it, since it creates squirrels as a byproduct of you already creating tokens. To me, Chatterfang is more similar a commander to Adrex and Neve Twin Casters since it essentially doubles the amount of tokens you're creating. It's simply creating squirrels instead of actual copies. Chatterfang also has built-in interaction that can snipe any creature as well as providing a cheap sacrifice outlet for all the aristocrat effects in the deck. If that weren't enough, Forest Walk is also relevant since the boons and pumps have the potential of making it an unblockable one-turn clock if your opponents aren't careful. In a sense, I'm reminded of a Carnelia Fashionable Filcher in that I make the most of all of the commander's abilities instead of just building a Squirrel Tribal deck and calling it a day. You can check out that deck tech video in the link above if you want another squirrely deck. In fact, if your playgroup is fine with it, you can also include a Carnelia in this deck along with other cards like Earl of Squirrel too. They'd actually make the deck much more stronger, believe it or not. Silver bordered cards aren't just for the shits and giggles. Some of them are pretty strong, including these two. If you're interested in any of the deck lists, you can find a link to them down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the Brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link. That also helps out the channel. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of The Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I'm the Meta Kirby, and happy brewing.